So today we will be trying to play Oracle here. Before I start, I just want to ask a couple of questions to you guys. Can you hear me? Oh. Okay. So before we start, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions to you. So raise your hand if you're working with voice today. Nice. And chatbots? And both? Nice. Okay. So we have an amazing lineup of panelists today, and I'm just going to let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi. I'm David Browning, work for NBA Digital, which is a joint venture between Turner Broadcasting and the National Basketball Association. I run the emerging products team, so oversee all the voice products as well as our AR, VR, MR applications.
Hi, I'm Jonathon Myers, co-founder and CEO of Earplay. We started out as a sort of conversational design studio way back in 2013, made what was the first interactive radio drama. We've evolved into a platform for the creation and distribution of interactive audio experiences.
Hi, my name is Sandy Diep, and I am the global lead for Google Assistant's developer platform known as Actions on Google. And we work with third-party developers to help them get integrated onto the Assistant and engaging with users on their critical user journeys.
Hi, I'm Mark Mezrich. I run voice products for Viacom, so that's brands like MTV and Comedy Central and CMT and Nickelodeon and a few others that we make voice products for.
All right. So John, I heard that you started since 2013.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk how far are we right now compared to that time?
I can give a really quick overview in the sense that, like, back then, you know, I was in the studio and we were trying to figure out a way to do voice, and at the time, the only way to do it was kind of with nuance or very corporate tools that were used for, you know, phone trees and things like that, very enterprise, and it was like you had to pay for a call. For every single call to get a speech analyzed, you had to pay like 1/10 or 100th of a cent, and it was just impossible to do anything. And then next thing you know, there was Siri. Next thing you know, there was Alexa. And now it's all free, and there's an entire ecosystem that's created so anybody can do it now.
Yeah. So okay, now we can start talking about the future, right? What are some of the challenges that you guys see being disappearing or being ameliorated in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is just simple familiarity, right? So you think about, you know, Artie gave the example of, you know, people's kids, and I see this with my own kids. I have a 2-year-old who, you know, when we say, you know, just asking my wife, you know, what's the weather today, she'll run up to the Google Home or the Alexa and, you know, ask for the weather, and that's so intuitive to her. And you see this with kids all the time. We've actually done studies with younger kids, and you know, there's a way in which the GUIs are really intuitive, and that makes a lot of sense. But just have people growing up with voice, right? They're going to understand intuitively how to use it, and new things are going to start to happen. So I think you're going to see, you know, some of the discovery problems of like, how do I navigate that, will just be ameliorated by dint of the fact that people are familiar with these things and know their way around.
Yeah. Also, I think go on.
The other thing I was going to add is that you know, we have seen things improve quite a lot in the area of NLU and NLG. So if I take things back, like even say 2 years ago, it would have taken Google 12 months to generate a new voice. We've actually seen dramatic improvements, and last year it only took us 4 months. In terms of natural language understanding, like that's improved quite dramatically, where the Google Assistant can understand human speech even better than most humans can on average. So we're still really seeing things like word correction and accuracy improve a lot, and I think that will make, you know, really pave the path for things to be a lot easier if you look at what will be ameliorated in the future. I think another area is that, you know, what I hope is that some of the complexities in terms of communicating between languages get simpler too, because we now have the ability to be able to translate between languages and support multilingual across many different platforms.
That just to piggyback off of that, I think, yeah, at this early stage, it's kind of like there are boundaries here and there. Like the early days of the web, the way that people found things were through web rings, where people just kind of came together and found ways to like associate information with each other. And I feel we're in a stage that some of those boundaries, like for right now, for example, we just consider these things to be grounded in devices, but I think eventually over time, these devices are just going to float to the background, and you're just, no matter where you are, what you're doing, your voice is detected, so it knows who you are, or these online assistants know who you are, and it can happen anywhere as long as there's a mic and a speaker. And I think that also, just in terms of the Google and Alexa being together at the forefront here, I think that also will dissolve a little bit so that we're actually just always speaking to the web through these assistants as opposed to just getting to the assistants as a first step.
I think the cost and the level of effort will continue to come down as well, right? So the first skills that we were building, it was a lot of manual process to both build and to test that. So for the NBA skill, we've got like 1,100 different ways you can ask for a score or a schedule or play a game, and that was a very laborious process. So I think as we go along, we're going to see more and more of these CMS type functionalities where you kind of create the interaction models and the conversation flows, and then you can kind of export that out to the different platforms, and that dramatically brings down your cost to scale these things out.
David, you were just talking about CMS functionality. I want to turn gears a little to talk about content and content creators in the future, since most of you are working with creating content for voice. Do you see any use cases for content creators changing or being created new ones as the platform evolves?
Yeah, so I mean, our main use cases are asking for scores, asking for schedule, or to play a live game, right? And so there's kind of two very different types of interactions there. One are very transactional, very short, very shallow. What's the score of the Hawks game, right? You should expect a very specific, precise answer back from that. But as far as the kind of long-form audio content, I feel like more in the competitive space against podcasts, right? Because we think that there is a great value proposition of being able to just, particularly get in your car, which I'll get to later, and say, Alexa or Google or Siri, play the Lakers game. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, that a lot of our use from a League Pass audio standpoint is on the West Coast. And right, it makes sense because as games on the East Coast are starting to begin, that's right around the drive time or the commute time on the West Coast. So we're really focused on how we integrate and create a very frictionless environment so that as people are getting into their cars, they can start that interaction with the NBA. They can get caught up on what happened, the night before from the scores and schedules. They can start to listen to their team's game. And by the time they get home, they're kind of invested in that game or in that storyline so that they can continue to then interact with the NBA either on another Alexa or smart speaker in their home, or particularly, saying, hey, now I want to watch it on the best available screen in my room. So you want to put it on your Fire TV or on whatever your large scale TV in your home is.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of what you said earlier too, there's the difference between what would be kind of just a VUI interaction, an ask and respond, and then what would be kind of a crafted VUX experience where you're holding the user and you're having a conversational back and forth, and that can go on over time. And I think that there's a certain type of expertise that's required to make that compelling, and some things work and some things don't. I think that the industry's in the middle of figuring that out, and I think the tools are only just now coming along that enable that to be made very quickly so that it doesn't have to be a conversation between a coder and a designer.
And I think it dovetails to the last point of what's going to make it easier too. Is right. When we started building skills 2.5 years ago, there was not a lot of people who had a lot of expertise, both in the engineering side, but also in the design side, right? So, building out a conversational flow seems easy, right? Like we all talk, right? So, but it was actually quite difficult to get the interactions just right so that it wasn't too invasive. So it was still pretty shallow because we believe in a very shallow model of interacting with a voice platform. And so as you go on, you're going to have more and more saturation through the engineering, through the design, through the product space of having more and more people who've got exposure to this, either through a chatbot or through a skill development. So you'll have a larger target of talent, and that's something that very early on we kind of struggled with, was finding really high quality talent to build these things out for us.
Yeah, well, I just want to piggyback on what David is saying about the challenges of developing on voice, and I think that there's a lot there that we are coming to an awareness on overall. If you think of kind of general consumer internet behavior, everybody's used to interacting through specific entry points on different modalities. So, for example, on your computer, you're used to interfacing with a computer with a keyboard and a mouse. On your smartphone, you're tapping specific buttons, right, for apps and like following menus and kind of crafted user flows. But what's really really intriguing and really exciting about the opportunity with voice is that users naturally want to have a conversation with these devices. And it's what we find is that it's incredibly common for there to be thousands of ways that people ask for information or ask to take action differently. For example, like what we've seen is even in just the very simple use case of setting a timer, people will ask for that in 5,000 different ways. And even with the weather, you know, you can say to the assistant, hey, what's the weather tomorrow? Or you can just ask it, should I bring an umbrella? And you know, you'll be able to get a natural response from that. But I think those are the things that make it really challenging, but I think that's also one of the great opportunities ahead for us.
To that point about different modalities, it's really interesting to see already the evolution of, and Jonathan, you're mentioning this in terms of you know, the way that voice will be embedded in everything, right? So there's like an input modality of I think of voice right now as when I speak to this voice box, right? The Google Home, the Alexa, right? But eventually we'll be able to do that really fluidly. We can do this in certain ways with our phones and on the web, and then that input point, we can sort of mix and match a little bit, you know, depending on where we're on. We won't even think of it so much as a voice platform. And David, your point about, you know, continuing the game from voice and over to, right, you know, you could be watching, you know, continuing it on TV. So the way that these things start to fluidly just become, you know, voice is just one type of input, it's another type of output, you know, someone speaking, but it's not going to be necessarily these clean lines between, you know, this is a voice experience and this is a web experience or this is even a TV experience. And the way those things will interact is really interesting and opens up a lot of opportunities.
Definitely.
Well, I was going to say, I think it gets exciting when you start realizing that, you know, we've been watching sci-fi stories for many, many years about this, and now it's kind of happening, and it gets, that to me is what gets me excited, is thinking about how we're moving toward that future of, you know, the Star Trek or the, you know, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, so related to that, there is this localization problem, right? And Sandy, I want to start with you on this one because I know Google Assistant is the one who has most support for languages with more than 30 locales right now. How do you see localization getting easier or not in the future?
So we're live in 79 countries and across a lot of different dialects. So you know, the ability to have a one-to-one conversation in one language is one dimension of what the Google Assistant offers. But over the course of last year, we also provided the support for multilingual, where a person could switch from, say, English to Spanish or say, you know, Spanish to French easily within the same conversation. And it's, you know, it's quite complex for you know, our platform technology to be able to understand the intonations and the grammatical differences and the dialect differences, and you know, immediately be able to respond to that. So I have a lot of you know, respect for the engineers and the PMs who have been able to come up with that technology. But what I truly hope is that we can enable that for all developers and all brands who want to reach their audiences and speak to them in their preferred language. Imagine a situation where instead of having to hire your own translation firm and, you know, have to handle IATN and all of the localization requirements, that you submit all of that in one language, and then there's, you know, kind of like, I guess the core DNA of language, right, that serves to translate that and interpret that for every person on the other end. So I think like that's really fascinating.
Yeah,
I would say as a developer right now, today, that's definitely a challenge, right? So excited about that future, but just today, it's so interesting to think about, you know, I came from building mobile apps, right? You think about mobile apps, you have to translate a few words, but like the GUI more or less is going to translate to different countries. And there's other localization problems besides translation, but just to that piece. But if you're building something where words is the UX, right? Or words are the UX, that's a big translation problem. That's a big localization problem. So dealing with that today, you know, David, to your point about, you know, getting development teams and getting this on board, if you're trying to do this globally in a really authentic way, it's a big challenge as we stand today.
And even if you just think about like what is colloquial in one language, it could just be vastly different in the other. And then it's like, but that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to capture colloquial speech, the way people talk.
Yeah, you
not
do it
just
authentically.
Yeah.
It makes it really dependent on the underlying platform. Like, I mean, Amazon or Google, for you guys that are developing on top of that? I mean, for the localization challenges?
there's ways they can make it easier, and it sounds like Google's working on that. I think today a lot of this is on us, but
I think for me, because what we mostly do is interactive audio, where we're creating sort of dramatic scenarios with actors and sound effects and that sort of thing, it becomes a bit difficult because that means at this stage, with the nascent sort of ecosystem, in order to localize, it wouldn't just simply be, okay, we're going to localize the VUI and the VUX and think about how this is translated. It would also need to be re-recorded and re-put together in audio, which, most of the times it's very worth it. We hear, these kind of skills get really high ratings, but at the same time, that makes it also harder to localize over
translate,
into a
and you
different-
need to do a cultural translation too.
Yep.
All right, so.
So I've got some. Localization is actually an enormous area of focus for us because we're an incredibly global brand, right? And so being able to offer your product, globally, or at least to your targeted countries or regions, is certainly a big part of how we think we're going to grow this. The NBA is always very focused on its global growth, and honestly, I would really like to see, and this is to Sandy's point, of the same way that web browsers evolved to kind of handle some of these, web accessibility type of challenges that most organizations don't have the funding and the pockets to kind of dedicate to these kind of non-core business type of engineering challenges. So when the browsers started doing a lot more as far as translations and things like that, that actually helped out a lot of the industry, the publishers out there, because certainly you have your very large enterprises that can afford to do some of these things, not necessarily willfully, but they do it. And then you have kind of a large spectrum of users or publishers who really they're getting by on shoestring budgets. So being able to rely on some of these kind of platform level enhancements that help you grow and globalize a little easier is a big deal. The second piece is we, being our kind of most valuable IP on the voice space right now is the long form content. So being able to listen to the live audio of a game. And right now, the way that the League Pass system works is we actually just ingest the local broadcasters' radio station. So you get kind of, the guys and girls from Atlanta call in the games for Atlanta. The same for across all of the 30s teams. Well, the problem with that is what we're doing is we're just ingesting that source feed, and so you may be listening to the Lakers game in Atlanta, but you're still getting LA-based advertisement, right? And so we want to be able to, and we're looking at ways to do some kind of dynamic ad insertion the same way we're doing it on our video products, where those local ads are still presented to the local region, but maybe there's different ad campaigns that are dynamically inserted during those mid-roll opportunities, because I think this is very much an opportunity where we're going to, I think, see the best growth opportunities, monetization opportunities through an ad-supported model. And then the third piece is, so I'm looking down at this slide we've got up, and we've got the wrong NBA logo in there. And so just being able to, we have a very highly regulated branding standards at the NBA. And so just being able to target and specifically update specific logos or IP things is a challenge that we deal with operationally all the time. And being able to kind of target and be able to reach out and update and manage your branding and your kind of brand presentation in a very localized way is something that is a real operational challenge.
Mark?
One of the things that's really reassuring here is that if we think towards the future, this isn't a new problem, right? So I come from Viacom, we're trying to take Jersey Shore from MTV and bring it to another country. We've done that before, right? And sometimes it's as simple as, all right, this country is really interested in Jersey Shore as it is, and we're going to bring it to that country. And in some countries, they don't know what Jersey is, so we have to your point, it's not just translation, it's localization. So we have to find the shore that's relevant to their country, which we really do. And then sometimes it's translation, right? So there's all sorts of challenges, but if you think about voice and media, we've dealt with this before, right? And the scale is going to dictate how much we're willing to invest in that. So if we get to the scale where we're willing to Jonathan's point, re-record the audio in the right language, we can do that. And we can do that today, and there's nothing about the platforms that prevents us from doing that. We just have to figure out if it's worth that considerable investment.
Well, and I think also, there's sort of at the earliest stages, the cost of these things is a lot higher, and as time goes on, like, if you can imagine the very beginning of the web, it was very expensive to make a web page. Now it's like nothing, right? And I think that as that cost goes down over time, there's also the increasing value of what people can get out of it, and there's sort of this nice little spot where those two can converge, where everything's great. And I think, the one thing I would also point out too is that in some ways, some of the things you're talking about, it's a live service, and I think part of the industry understands this, and part of the industry isn't quite there yet. But I think that those who kind of invest and think about their skill, their URL, their voice URL as a live service that they're constantly updating and growing, and those are going to be the people that kind of come out ahead in the next few years.
Yeah. So David, you were talking before about how your experiences are in the car, or Mark, in different settings. And I want to talk a little how voice is changing the radio today, right? And I think we can start with you because you guys are already working on it.
Yeah, so I think it has two impacts. One, there's hands-free driving laws that are popping up all over the country. I think a third of the states now have hands-free as far as all contact with your device. 47 states have texting bans, which to me, it's kind of the same thing. So really, I'm thinking that most of the country, if not nearly all of them, I think it's Montana and Arizona are two of the holdouts, basically are putting a lot of restrictions over what you can do with your phone while you're in the car. So this is a natural opportunity for voice. And I think there's I wish I could remember where I saw this stat, but I saw this fascinating stat within the last 6 months or so that it's estimated that there's going to be 900 million more minutes added to the American ecosystem of the drive time commute over the next, I think it was 6 years. And that was due to, urbanization, more people moving to larger cities, and then also those cities growing and people living farther out from them. So to me, it's really one of the few available land grabs that's left right now in the digital space. So we're really focused on how can we create a really compelling and easy to use opportunity in the car. And to my point earlier about live audio kind of is consistent or similar to the podcasting space, it creates this wonderful opportunity where those regional or kind of non-global, nationwide content offerings are now available anywhere, right? You don't have these geographic and broadcast and terrestrial radio limitations anymore. So it's really kind of reinforcing that content is king paradigm again. So you've got this great opportunity for really good, whether it be highly produced or just low-end user-generated content really bubbling up to the top of this and having this opportunity for this enormous audience. And then we've got some other opportunities that we're actually just getting into now where we can do kind of influencers calling games. So you can have, your traditional broadcasters who are doing the kind of the more traditional way of calling a games, but then you may have two or more, just fun, cheeky, kind of nonsensical at times, perhaps, guys or girls calling a game, and it's just this new opportunity to interact with it in a different kind of way, the same way that you're seeing kind of user-generated content on YouTube really starting to take off and getting the attention of a lot of enterprises and not just looking down on that and saying, how can we squash that, but rather, how do we bring that into the fold and make them part of our brand offering and give you something that's different and have a variety, because it's easy to think that there's not just one way that people want to consume that content, whether that's NBA or MTV or whatnot.
And that take us to personalization, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you can know a lot more about that person and over time kind of target better ads to them and being able to finally grow and kind of mature this in the same trajectory that some of the other traditional platforms have had over the last 5-10 years.
Yeah. So John, you just released a game with Bose AR audio platform.
Yeah, in sort of in the voice spectrum, but through iOS using gestures as well as voice. Yeah.
Is that going to be related to radio?
I think, well, everything we do is kind of related to radio. I like to think that right now, it's kind of a reinvention of radio. Things that were kind of a little nascent are just popping out again. We've seen it even before Alexa with podcasts and dramatic podcasts, serial, things like that have just taken off. And for us, we feel like it's a very powerful medium, voice, human voice, sound, audio, and I feel like it's just on the rise. And so for us, you know, we're interested in it not just in a sort of linear manner of like we're going to sit and listen to music or we're going to listen to an audiobook, but we'd like to think of it as how do you interact with it, and not just with stories either. Like, you know, we do a little role-playing thing where you're in and you play a you know, a James Bond kind of character, and we want to reinvent that on all kinds of different stories. But imagine though, like, you know, rather than tuning in and listening to someone else interview a famous person on the radio, you can ask the questions. And there's just a bunch of audio that's been cut up in a way that you can traverse it in a conversation. You get to have the conversation. There's all kinds of ways. We haven't even scratched the surface of what it's really going to be like to interact with audio in the future on these platforms.
Nice.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think there's two things that are potentially really exciting about, you know, voice and radio and the opportunities to explore there. One is, you know, as you've mentioned, like the interactivity and how can we actually deliver, you know, a compelling and unique experience beyond what people get today from live radio or from podcasts. We look at there to be opportunities where there's a companion experience where, you know, if somebody, you know, say does come home and want to, you know, turn on their TV and watch the NBA, then is there some, you know, live action dialogue that can happen alongside that, right? Perhaps with friends or with, you know, perhaps some, you know, celebrities or folks who are, you know, in the know in the game, that can really enhance and make that a, you know, very exciting experience for the audience. The other is in accessibility. You know, we see this journey as really a marathon in terms of the evolution of voice and, you know, this new reality in growing to a more immersive and, you know, engaged format for consumers to interact with technology. And we're still in the early stages, but, you know, it's definitely intense. And, you know, what I think helps the team keep going at times is just seeing that, you know, we get a lot of great feedback from users, from parents of young kids who appreciate that, you know, the assistant is helping kids establish really good routines, like brushing their teeth and going to bed at a, you know, at a good hour. Or, you know, families that have elder adults and, you know, they use the assistant regularly as their way to connect with the world and get their favorite news. So I think there's some really exciting opportunities ahead for us, but I look at things from those two dimensions when it comes to radio.
To the point of, David, I like the way you're thinking about it in terms of radio being sort of a land grab, right? That we can take from the linear and make it interactive, and there's a real opportunity there. There's also additional hours that we have that we didn't have before in audio. If you think about the AirPods, right, or Bose AR, or a lot of things like that, where there's people listening to audio in hours that they didn't before. So that's a whole new set of opportunities that are only going to continue to grow in the future. And I think the Hey Siri interactivity that just launched with AirPods is really significant for voice interactivity. And obviously you'll see Alexa and Google start to play in those spaces as well. So adding those hours to the day that are audio first in some way is really interesting for us and creates a lot of opportunities.
Definitely.
And touching back to like the issue with discovery, I think that's a huge challenge, and you can't underscore that enough. And one thing that, you know, personally that I would love to see is a kind of more of like a playlist type of functionality. To your point, we're interacting with these things in a lot of new places. Certainly, sometimes, you know, when you're by yourself and it's kind of appropriate to talk to something. But there's also times where you may be on a subway or on a bus or, you know, on a plane, and it's just kind of odd to just be talking out to a piece of technology, even if it is like a really, you know, quick and easy way to get into that content. So in the same way that, you know, with music, one of the great use cases of voice, you can build these playlists. You may be in your I need my tech news playlist, or I just want, you know, I want to hear, you know,
your own
relaxing. Yeah.
station.
So I think there's a real need for this ability to kind of have these like channeled or playlist type of lean back functionality, so that you can kind of set up, this is my preferred content sources, this is my preferred you know, places and things that I want to listen to, and then you can just interact with it once and you get that feed of that content driven to you, and I think that's going to help adopt more of that land grab as well, because it's as a method of interacting with voice, it's great and it's easy, but it gets cumbersome and tiring really quickly, and especially if you start running into issues of it didn't understand you for this, and it's too loud, it's not really hearing me well enough. Like being able to kind of lean back in that, I think, is an important part, which is a similar trajectory of how kind of video on the web evolved, right? You got more into autoplay and those types of kind of lean back experiences.
We build, we think of really heavy interactive experiences like games, and the rest of it we try and actually get out of the way as much as possible and not have users say a lot of things. It's just like, Alexa, give me this piece of media from Comedy Central. Awesome, great, thank you. And just really entertain people for as long as possible that way. So we do try and optimize for that, as I'm sure you do as well. But and it's also why the Google platform Narrative News and Alexa flash briefings have done really well for us.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think there's almost maybe too much emphasis on the really cool, exciting things you can do that are interactive without thinking about how much work there is for the user. So I think as we start to see those metrics come back, we'll realize that those lean back experiences are more valuable than maybe we're giving credit for.
Yeah, and I think in the world of, in the area of discoverability, it is, a challenge because sometimes people look at, their speaker and don't quite know what to ask for. I'm encouraged by the fact that we're seeing really high traction with mobile as well as with smart displays, and we see that when users interact, it's very natural for them to both use voice and touch and tap in those instances. So there's something to be said about that multiple engagement model. I think what's really exciting about this whole world of voice is that it's not only about the lean back experience. I think yes, it's hard to get to a really granular level of interactivity with people today, but what we usually like to advise our partners is that think of you as a consumer, think about your daily routines. What are things that you wish the assistant could do that would help make your life easier in the morning? You're getting ready for work, getting your kids ready for school, or going on your commute at the end of the day or on the weekends. And I think we're getting to a place where, from a platform standpoint, we're able to start to understand the intents and open up those intents to partners so that you can interact with users at that moment. That is where I think we'll start to see some really big changes in discoverability.
Yeah,
I think the one thing that's missing right now, to use the web analogy again, is we don't have the hyperlink yet.
Yeah.
So like
sure.
right now, you enter into a session and you exit out of a session, and there are different ways you can enter in. You can do one shots, things like that. Kind of deep link into something, but you have to know what that URL is, and you have to paste it, so to speak, with your voice. And I think that the moment when things open up to where you can be in one skill or action and then move from that into a link into another one, I think discoverability will just pop right open.
Yeah, I think the companion app component of all of this hasn't yet gotten its light in the day to really evolve into what is going to be that real equal footing component of this voice. I mean, multimodal functionality is really big for us, and we're really focused on that this year because we have a very visually based product, right? Like certainly audio is a one of our product offerings, but it's by no means our most compelling, right? And so we want to be able to get you can talk about a dunk all day, but seeing it is totally different. So how do we and we're going to be working to kind of bridge that voice, and primarily on your phone. You may ask for something, but the best way for you to experience it may not just be me telling you about it. I want to show you. So we're going to be really looking into that, and we also have the discovery thing. Like there's this unique interaction or relationship between first-party functionality on the platforms and the third-party functionality of the publishers.
For sure, yeah.
And it's all driven or limited, I should say, by the method of invocation, right? Like you have to say, Alexa, ask the NBA for the score of the Hawks game versus Alexa, ask for, what's the score of the Hawks game? And I think a lot of users, even if they, we can interact with them one time, just looking at the data from a retention standpoint, you see that either people get confused, my hypothesis, that you have to continue to ask for the NBA rather than, I've already enabled that skill, why aren't you just giving it to me? And so we have this unique challenge of, there's certain parts of our product offering that is just commodity data, right? Like you can go and get sports scores at any sports website. And so it's almost, to me, it's like this Google One Box kind of paradigm where if you don't know to ask for the content from a specific publisher, you're just going to default to that first party functionality, and it's a really big challenge right now. And I know that the platforms have been kind of making some progress on kind of getting rid of or figuring out a better way to deal with this invocation issue, but this goes back into kind of the companion app for me, or some other way of being able to set, like, what are my default sources? Kind of more like Twitter does or Instagram, where you follow your specific publishers or content sources, and then if you ask something in that realm, it knows that you want that content from that provider rather than having to invoke that with your voice every time. So that's something that I've been trying to work with the platform owners with, to kind of help us get into a better place, to kind of not block publishers who may have the same types of data, and helping us grow on those platforms rather than just continuing to hammer in the first-party functionality that that is built into the applications.
Okay, last question.
System.
Yeah, exactly.
Last question. So what do you guys think needs to occur? Like, I feel the installment base of devices have taken off a lot last year. What do you think needs to occur for voice landscape to take off way more this year and in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'll go. For me, it's all about the car and the hands-free laws that are eventually, we'll all start to get either direct or anecdotal issues of getting tickets, being pulled over for having a device in your hand. And as soon as you do that, you're going to change your perspective on how you interact with digital components in your car. So for me, it's all about the aftermarket hardware that goes in the car, either putting in an entire new touchscreen receiver in your car, which is an expensive proposition. I don't think that's the right one. We've got the Alexa Auto new device that's coming out very soon. So for me,
the car.
The car is everything for me.
John, yeah.
Can I think about that for a second?
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think we mentioned, AirPods before as being sort of important to growth. I think there's just a natural growth curve, like you mentioned, that we're just going to continue to see. But it's also, there's some level of that, I'm sure, is that these things can come down to $30 and you were buying it. But we're actually really encouraged by metrics that we've seen around people buying that $30 device and sort of just saying, let me just check out, Google Home Mini or the small, Echo Dot. But then they're actually really using it and using it more and more and more. So I think there's buying it, but then also converting it. We were worried for a while that we were seeing everyone was touting their sales numbers, right? And it was going to be like Samsung TVs, where like people 5 years ago, people sort of had them, but they weren't necessarily plugging in the Ethernet cable back when that was how those were connected. But I think we're really quickly seeing people really buy them and adopt them, and then going in. But for us, for it to matter, to David's point, they've got to get to those third party things. And just really quickly on that point, we think of that a lot as sort of SEO, right? And we're trying to adopt sort of an SEO mindset for the things that we do. So what are people organically asking for anyway, that we can have a really good offering that makes sense for our brands and our IP. So, and to your point, sort of working with the platforms to make sure that we can be in there in a way that's really meaningful. So as we think towards the future, having ways that we can, SEO the system in a way that's fair for everyone, to sort of say, hey, we have the best answer to, Alexa, I want to play a game. So, BBC could be an answer, Nickelodeon could be an answer, and we know enough about the user to say, this is, they really want the BBC option, is great, and we just want to make sure we're serving up the right content to the right people. But that's going to be a big change as people buy more of those devices.
Sandy, you have a different perspective because
Sure.
you guys are the platform.
Yeah, I think 3 points. So one is, certainly multimodal is very exciting for us, in car or on the phone. We've seen a lot of traction, especially in countries like India, Mexico, Brazil, and others, where it's very natural for people to use voice first on their phones. And as you know, there's many countries where adoption of phones precedes even, computers, right, PCs. So that's pretty exciting and innovative, we think, for a lot of users of the assistant. The other, I think, is personalization. So, being able to offer users the content that they want at the time that they need it, understand, what are their preferences, and, understand context a bit better. And the third is, along the lines of discovery, which, David, you had mentioned earlier, around the challenge of, 1P, 3P, and, how can the platform really know when to deliver information to the user. It's quite an active discussion that we have every single day in Google Assistant land. And I will say that, there's a lot of different considerations around how quickly can we respond, where's content available in different geographies, but very much, an awareness that in order for us to unlock discoverability, we have to be able to meet users where they are and be able to respond in the context, and sometimes when they context switch, which makes those challenges pretty interesting and, hopefully is something that we can tackle in the next year.
All right, you have.
So the reason I hesitated, I was trying to debate between one or two things, but they're kind of related, so I'll try and throw them in together. Number one, I feel like there are some concerns about privacy, and there are concerns, I think, with people being comfortable. And it's not just about, oh, my voice is being recorded. I think it's also some lessons that we're learning about Facebook and other sites, and what happens with the data. So I think that people are coming to this ecosystem a little more cautious just up front. And I think that also ties into monetization and what people are comfortable with doing. As Artie had pointed out, like almost all the majority of the voice purchasing are in a very secure, my credit card is locked away with a very particular service and I just have to say I want it again. That's a lot different than actually going out and trying to find something and buy or use that. So I think those two are tied together, and I don't know what the answer is, but I just think that once that alleviation is, maybe somebody comes up with the most amazing voice print technology that just becomes ubiquitous and suddenly everybody trusts that when I speak it's listening to me and only me, maybe that could happen.
Excellent, thank you. So I don't know if we have time for...
Minutes for audience
questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Questions.
So I'm wondering. Hi, I'm wondering what your assessment is of impact of, I guess you'd call it user response marketing along the lines of what InStreamatic and Pandora's AdWiz are doing, where in response to some audio program, users can actually say, hey, yeah, I want that thing when they're hearing it. Are you familiar with that?
By that, do you mean that like you can hear about something and then ask for it and buy it? I'd say I think it's at the earliest stages of. I don't even know if I think there might actually be an experiment that is going to be on a panel later today. A friend of mine from I think Rain is going to talk about that specifically. But I think that it's very early experimental days for that kind of stuff, what I understand.
Any other question?
I know there are a lot of use cases on the consumer space, but what about on the enterprise side? I know, some of the challenges on the enterprise for putting this voice platform.
So for the NBA, I've got a colleague here, Aaron Zena over there. He's kind of focused on the customer support side of all of that and has a lot of great insights as to how all of this ties together, both from a front-end consumer standpoint and a back-end customer account management, account linking type of standpoint. So I'll introduce you to him later, and he'll have a great response for you.
So this may be beyond the scope of this panel, but do you have any thoughts around voice and applications, and voice bringing up applications and interacting with them?
What kind of applications? Can you just clarify?
Like in a mobile app or something? Yeah, we're really bullish on that. So this is like what we were talking about before about different modalities and how all these things are just kind of come together in one sort of big UX soup, right? So whatever's right for the moment is how you you want to invoke it. So you could invoke a mobile app, right, by touching on it, or if you're far away in the room and you want to invoke it by your voice, that's fine. And then you just have to be cognizant, right, of how did that person invoke it? Do they want a voice experience? Are they far away in the room? And then the mobile app, right, has to adjust and not be mobile, that at that point has to be voice first. So we're really starting to think about how is voice going to be the basis of everything that we do, whether it's web, whether it's mobile. So from the remote to start playing some audio, and if you're on your TV, that's really simple. And if it's on mobile, then you have to really account for all those different use cases and make it part of your core architecture. So it's a challenge, but it's definitely, I think, where everything's going.
I think the very first place that we're going to see what you're talking about, though, is going to be in the car with heads-up displays and navigation systems where it needs to interact with what you're looking at or need information from, because it's just a necessity there. So I'd say that's the first place it'll pop up. But yeah, I mean, everybody's like, it's very much something that people need to do, need to think about. Is more than just like these, invisible smart speakers.
Hi there. I think a lot of voice experiences are really optimized around giving someone the latest thing from whatever brand or publisher they're following. But for a company like Viacom or the NBA with so much back catalog, like there's so much value there. And like when you think about YouTube and the spontaneity of like going down 7 layers and uncovering something, like how do you think about the challenge of making your back catalog accessible to voice?
So for us, our historical archive of stats is a very valuable asset that we have, and it's something on our other platforms that gets a lot of traffic. And I think that's where not everything necessarily translates to voice, right? And so you may say, what was LeBron's numbers his rookie season? Yeah, you could spout off some numbers, but eventually you stop listening because you're listening to the last one. You start thinking about something. So that's where I think multimodal really comes into it, to be able to have smart, dynamic, deep links into an app that will show you that data in a different form.
For us also, I would say Alexa, give me stand up, and you'll hear some of that back catalog from Comedy Central. So we're definitely thinking about that. It's not, I think we're never looking for a solution, to find like, we got this back catalog, where can we bring it to someone? But obviously if the use case is like, that someone could go really deep here, they could spend a lot of time, which is what we're seeing with that skill, then we're gonna add more and more and more, and that back catalog becomes very useful in that context.
All right, we are exactly out of time. Thank you, David, Mark, John, and Sandy, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.